friends, I'm Bailey. Welcome to my corner of the internet. Hope you're all doing well today. Please take a moment, like, subscribe, and let me know where you're coming in from. Thank you all so much for all the love and support. I'm going to tell you the story to the best of my ability, taking very public information and filtering it through my own unprofessional opinion. Please do your own research and form your own opinion. As uncomfortable as it is for us to talk about these stories, imagine how difficult it is for everyone affected. We owe it to them to acknowledge their unbearable experiences, learn something from it, and raise awareness. Everything in the story is alleged. There are still people that are considered innocent as they have not been proven guilty or taken a guilty plea. Today's riddle: I come from a mine and I'm always surrounded by wood. Everyone uses me. What am I? Crystal Maria Ballard was born on April 4th, 1980, and she was the first child in her family. Her parents, Sherry and Tommy, high school sweethearts, later had two more children, and they decided to raise their family in Bardstown, Kentucky. Bardstown is a cute little town. It's in Nelson County and is often referred to as the bourbon capital of the world due to the 11 distilleries within a 10-mile radius of downtown. Crystal was a devoted mother. Her children were her pride and joy. At the time of her disappearance, she was still legally married to Keith Rogers, even though that they were separated. As a single mother, she worked hard to make ends meet, and she would ensure her kids had everything that they needed. She was very protective of her children, and she would even become upset if anyone tried to discipline them. After separating from her husband, Crystal found a new place to live and met her landlord, Brooks William Houck. Now, Brooks came from a prominent family in the small community. He had a background in managing rental properties and was known for his construction work. In 2014, Brooks filed as a Democrat for the Nelson County Sheriff's Office. His older brother Nick was also part of the local police department. Crystal and Brooks quickly hit it off and they began dating. Soon after, they discovered that they were expecting a child. In 2013, they welcomed their son Eli. Crystal and Brooks lived together on Glenview Drive. However, her family started to notice that Brooks seemed distant towards Crystal's four children, treating them with less respect and care that he showed Eli. Brooks made it clear that Crystal's four children were hers and hers alone, and that he would buy groceries for Eli, but he expected Crystal to provide for her other children. While Brooks ensured that all the houses that he was in charge of were well maintained, Crystal handled much of the background work. She would list and show these properties to potential renters. On July 3rd, 2015, Crystal went to Walmart and showed a few houses. A friend had invited her to take the children to Chuck E. Cheese, but Crystal mentioned that she was going to get a babysitter and send the older kids off with their dads so that she could have a date night with Brooks. Okay. Crystal returned home around 5:15 and Brooks returned home at about 5:30 and they started getting ready for their night out. Brooks, Crystal, and Eli left for their date night at 7 p.m. Surveillance cameras captured them driving past Circle K and arriving at the family farm at 7:19. The next day, Crystal's family couldn't reach her. Brooks and Crystal had planned to attend a barbecue, so her family assumed that that's where they were. Brooks said he woke up early, got ready, and went to the family farm. Later, he went to the 4th of July party without Crystal. On Sunday, July 5th, 2015, Sherry received a text from her granddaughter, Kylie. She asked if she had heard from Crystal. Sherry replied that she hadn't, so she texted Crystal and said, "Hey, Kylie's looking for you." A few hours later, Kylie texted Sherry again and asked if she ever heard back from Crystal. Sherry said that she hadn't heard from her, so she started reaching out to other family members and some of Crystal's friends. Now, it was unusual for Crystal to ignore everyone, especially her children. Shortly before 3 p.m., Crystal's parents and brother went to the sheriff's office to file a missing persons report. Now, along the way, Sherry had ran into Brooks and Eli at a Walmart gas station. Sherry walked up to the passenger side of the truck and asked Brooks if he had seen Crystal. He said that he hadn't. When Sherry told Brooks that she was going to file a missing persons report, he responded, "Well, I think that that's what you should do." He was very calm and didn't seem worried at all. At 5 p.m., Crystal's brother Casey spotted a car along mile marker 114 on the Bluegrass Parkway, which looked similar to Crystal's red Chevy Impala. The keys were in the ignition, and her phone and purse were on the passenger side seat. There was a skid mark behind the car indicating that someone had driven on a flat tire, so the rim had made a groove into the pavement. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, the family called the police to investigate. They knew that even if Crystal had pulled over due to a tire concern, it did not explain why her phone and her purse were left behind, especially since she would have called her dad or brother for help. Now, maybe someone pulled over to check on her, make sure she was okay, and she could have used their phone if her phone was dead. But nobody in her family had received a phone call. There was one more thing that stuck out to Crystal's family. Crystal would always have the seat back so that she could drive with her leg propped up on the side. When the car was found, the seat was leaning up in a position that Crystal rarely ever had it in. So that left them wondering if Crystal wasn't the last person that had been driving her car. Authorities brought bloodhounds to the area where the vehicle was found. They couldn't track Crystal's scent. They had gotten some items from Crystal's home that smelled like her, gave it to the dogs, and had them check around the area in the car, out the car, the area around. Maybe somebody stopped and she walked over. I think there was even a tree line that they may have checked. Nothing. The dogs could not find her scent. If she had gotten out of the car to check to see maybe the tire was flat, that should have had the dogs pick up her scent. So, some people started believing that maybe the dogs just weren't able to track her at all. Maybe there was a fluke and they couldn't pick up her scent. So, they took the dogs to the family farm where she had been with Brooks, and the dogs led the investigators onto the trail. And Brooks said that that was the same trail that they went walking that night. So the dogs were able to pick up her scent, just not at the location of the car. It was as if Crystal had never been there. July 8th, just 3 days after she was reported missing, the Nelson County Sheriff's Department brought Brooks in for his third interview. Looking at the clock when the interview starts, it shows the interview began at about 5:10 p.m. if the clock was correct. Brooks said on the 3rd he had a very busy day caring for the rental properties. He, Crystal, and their 2.5-year-old son Eli planned on going to the family farm that's about 260 acres. He said that the other kids had had some jealousy issues, so they told the kids that they were getting a babysitter, and that's why they were going to their father's house. But the police confronted him about the fact that Crystal said, even herself, that she was getting a babysitter that night. Brooks said he didn't know anything about that, why she would say that, or anything. They were on the same page, and there wasn't a babysitter. Security footage from Brooks' aunt shows his vehicle arriving at the family farm around 7:15 and leaving 20 minutes later. Brooks said he was going to the tractor supply to get feed for the cows. However, Brooks turned around and came back thinking that Tractor Supply may be closed. Now, one would assume that he knew the hours of the Tractor Supply since he's been a farm kid, and they wouldn't wait until they were completely out. However, he also said that him, Eli, and Crystal fed the cows, went on a walk at the farm, and didn't leave the farm for home until about 11:55. Brooks claimed that when they got home, he went to sleep, and the last he saw was Crystal playing on her phone. Eli was also awake with her. Apparently, Eli could not go to sleep if anyone else was in the home awake, if there was electronics going. Investigators asked him if he frequently burned things on the property. Brooks said that he burns grass and stuff so that he doesn't have to pay the dump. He admitting to starting a fire that Friday night. Brooks claimed that when he woke up on the 4th, Crystal wasn't in bed and her car wasn't out front. Then they asked, well, if Crystal had stayed up late from the time you went to bed and was up later, why is it that when you woke up at 6 a.m., she wasn't still sleeping? Now, he didn't have a good answer for that. Authorities then asked about a 13-second phone call that had came into Brooks' phone at midnight on the night that they had supposedly left the farm, not even 5 minutes after they left. He claimed he couldn't remember who the phone call was from, so the investigators had him call the number back. When he called back, he realized that it was Steve. Brooks said, "Hey man, I don't remember our phone conversation the other night. Can you remind me?" And this man said, "Yeah, I called you about a rental property for my, I think it was stepdaughter. I needed a number for the property, and that's all I needed." So Brooks said, "Oh, okay, yeah. So what did I say back to you?" And the man said, "Well, you told me that you had to call Crystal to get the phone number and that you would give me a call back the next day." Investigators questioned his story because, according to his recount of that night, Crystal would have been in the car right next to him on their way home, even though Brooks had just told Steve that he had to call Crystal for the answer. Brooks said that their relationship had been stressful and that she would stay at her cousin Sabrina's house for days and hang out with her sister and friends. Her cousin Sabrina said that in the last 3 years, Crystal had only come to her house twice when the couple had argued. The first time was only for about an hour, and the second time was maybe about 2 hours. He portrayed himself as a fantastic person who stayed at home with the kids while Crystal, her family, her friends, they all had fantasy parties that they would go to. They would go out, party, do whatever. And of course, they couldn't take the kids with them. So he was just this great person that would keep everybody's kids. He said, "I'm good enough to get them. I'm good enough to take care of them. I'm a good enough person to do all that." Now, this didn't make much sense because Brooks had told the detectives that they had not even gotten into an argument that night. Now, Brooks goes off on a tangent because the detective said, "I would have called my wife if it was me." He repeats several times that he isn't alarmed. He's sure that the girls are doing this to him on purpose. Brooks said he woke up on Saturday around 6 to 7 a.m. Eli was sleeping on the bed. He said he got their son up and went along their usual morning. He didn't want to call or disturb Crystal if she was at Sabrina's house. He remembers that Eli ate yogurt for breakfast in the car on the way to the family farm. Brooks fixed the driveway at the front of the barn with a dozer while Eli was riding his tricycle, and he stayed in the line of Brooks. Brooks said that he may have gone home to get a shower so that he didn't smell like cows for the 4th of July gathering that night, but he doesn't remember. Now, the footage, or maybe testimony, apparently investigators find out that he had left the farm, him, Eli, Mom, to go to his Uncle Fabian's for dinner. Now, Brooks said that he knows that they didn't stay for the fireworks, and he would have returned to the farm, but not for long. And then he went home with Eli. Now, he called this person named Barbara on his way home to ease his concern because she would tell him the truth if something was going on with Crystal. I don't know if that was one of Crystal's friends or who that was exactly. Now, Brooks said he called Crystal once in the morning and a second time around 1 in the afternoon. During the interview, Brooks showed no emotion or worry about Crystal's whereabouts. He didn't remember exactly what he did at the farm that morning, the phone calls he received. He didn't remember if he had gone home to shower that day or how he even got to the party. And then all of a sudden, he remembered that his mom took him to the party. During Brooks' interview, his brother Nick calls him at 7 p.m. Remember, Nick works for the Bardstown Police Department. And he calls his brother knowing that he's in the middle of this interrogation. The phone call sounds weird and scripted and planned. Brooks repeats everything that Nick was saying, and Nick was saying it pretty loudly. It was pretty clear that Nick didn't want Brooks to talk to the investigators. Nick told Brooks that they would try to twist everything in their favor. Just hours after the call that interrupted Brooks' interview, a camera caught the two brothers driving to their family's farm, one after another. On July 9th, Brooks interviewed with Nancy Grace. The transcript of that interview has been logged into evidence. July 9th, investigators discovered that Nick had taken his squad car to the farm on the night of the 3rd. The police found this odd, so they decided to take the squad car in for further investigation. When detectives performed a luminol test, they found bodily fluid in the back of the vehicle and on a blanket in the trunk. The fire extinguisher was also missing. A canine also hit on the cruiser's rear quarter panel. There was only one other officer who had used that particular patrol cruiser, and that was years prior. On the 10th, Keith Rogers, remember that was Crystal's actual still legal husband and kid's dad, he said that he was at Crystal and Brooks' house to get clothes for the kids. At 8:30 p.m., Brooks got a call from Nick. They talked for a second and then hung up. Brooks called their mom, I think her name's Rosemary, and told her that Nick needed help at his house. And then he left. Nick's neighbors reported a suspicious item being transferred from a trunk to the mother's car from Nick's vehicle. On July 15th, 2015, Nick was called in to testify in front of a grand jury, which led police to suspect that he was also involved in the disappearance. In his grand jury testimony, Nick said that he was not at certain places, but investigators could actually prove that he was. Nick was interviewed after giving his grand jury testimony. It was odd that Nick didn't bring his phone. He actually left it at home. Now, I'm not sure if he couldn't have it with him or if he just wanted to keep his phone far away from the investigators. But remember, his brother took his phone, so I don't know why Nick didn't take his. The detectives asked him multiple times whether the brothers had talked while at the farm, what they had talked about, and what they had done. Each time, Nick said that he couldn't remember. The detectives noted that it had only been a week. They had footage from the 8th that showed Brooks driving to the farm and Nick was driving right behind him. Even multiple witnesses came forward and saw them going to the farm. They left together at 11:22, and at one point Nick pulled over and waited for his brother to catch up to him. For this to happen on the day that Brooks interviewed is weird. But Nick says it was a coincidence. Nick wasn't out there for the 2 weeks before, despite claiming that he had gone out there religiously. It seemed that Nick was trying to distance himself from his brother. Once confronted about the video, he can't remember anything. They asked Nick what items were in his cruiser. He listed a cardboard box, a fire extinguisher, hats, rain jackets, and maybe a blanket. Nick says that he had moved into a new home about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So this means that he would have moved at the end of June, around July 1st. Nick took the blanket from one of the sheds at the farm and he put it in between the furniture so that they didn't get damaged. When confronted by the luminol testing, Nick had no explanation for the bodily fluids in his cruiser or on the blanket. He remained calm and collected throughout the entire interrogation, almost as if he had practiced it. Finally, they called him out on his amnesia and the fact that the extinguisher wasn't in the cruiser. They also brought up his attempt to impede the investigation through his actions during Brooks' interview. He said he wanted John, the investigator, to know that he had called, so he had raised his voice so loudly that it could be heard. And he doesn't like Jon Snow because allegedly John admitted in the squad room that he had lied in court. Nick spent the entire interview trying to convince these investigators that he didn't know Crystal very well, that they had only seen each other a handful of times, and he said that he had rarely spoken to her over the last few years. Maybe he would see her on the street, but that was just about as far as their interactions went. He claimed that Brooks never complained to him about Crystal and their relationship. Investigators felt like Nick knew more than he was leading on, so they decided to have him take a polygraph. Nick was brought back into the office on July 24th, where FBI polygraph examiner discussed his results with him, which turned out to be less than perfect. The FBI gave both Brooks and Nick polygraph tests. Brooks' tests were inconclusive, and Nick just plain out failed. The questions he failed about was whether or not he knew where Crystal Rogers was now. Nick tells investigators, "I'm hoping she will walk right back through this door and clear this whole mess up. And if she don't, you guys are going to find her at some point. You're going to find out how she was killed, if there's any evidence under her fingernails, and it's not going to point to him or me." On August 15th, Crystal's family started their battle for visitation rights for Crystal and Brooks' son Eli, because ever since Crystal went missing and Brooks wouldn't let the family see him at all. They planned different visits repeatedly and he just wouldn't show. So they had no choice but to take legal action. Now, they could see Eli every other Sunday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. In 2018, a judge overruled this, claiming that the connection between Brooks and Sherry had boiled over to the point that spending time with his grandmother was not in the boy's best interest. Brooks claimed that Eli had begun asking him, "Well, what did you do to mommy?" He claimed that he was uncooperative every time after spending time with Sherry. Now, Sherry has since gained support from many people. People in the community held rallies to get some kind of visitation. Sherry said she would even take supervised visitation, but it was denied. On October 16th, 2015, a press conference was held, and they announced that former Bardstown police officer Nick Hauk had been fired due to his failed polygraph test and his interference with the Crystal Rogers case. His interference was cited on July 8th when he called his brother Brooks during his interrogation. There were 300 ish pages as to how he interfered with the police investigation by knowingly calling his brother in the middle of being interrogated. They said he lost his job because he took an oath. He had a duty as a sworn officer to protect and to serve. They said he couldn't even live up to the basic standards of being a police officer and that he interfered and didn't cooperate with the police. He told his brother not to cooperate, and in turn, he lost his job. In December 2015, a man named Danny Singleton was indicted for 38 counts of perjury after giving false testimony to a grand jury. Danny was a longtime friend of Brooks and he was a former employee. He knew Crystal and occasionally she would give him rides to and from work. He pleaded guilty in July 2016 to amended charges of false swearing, and he was released from jail after being in custody for about 6 months. On July 4th at 7 a.m., Danny called Brooks. Now, we don't know the nature of this conversation. By this timeline that was given by Brooks, he should have been at the family farm with Eli when this phone call had occurred. The two men had came forward saying that they knew that Danny had murdered Crystal, but none of this was true. 1 year later, around January 2016, the two men who made those false allegations against Danny came forward and said that they had lied about it. They were charged with false reporting on a crime. In November 2016, Crystal's father, Tommy Ballard, along with his 12-year-old grandson, Trenton, went toward the back of the farm while Casey and his son, Brandon, took the front part of the farm. They were going to actually go hunting this day. As Tommy and Trenton were about to enter the woods, Tommy was shot straight in the chest and he died instantly. Casey recalled sitting in his truck along with Brandon, listening to the radio, when they had heard one single gunshot. I don't know why they were in the truck when they were supposed to be hunting too. Sherry received a phone call from Trenton. She was being told that her husband had been shot. It was a single shot to his chest, and he unfortunately died on impact. And he was gone even before Sherry could arrive. Trenton told police that as soon as Tommy and Trenton got out of the car and turned the corner into the hunting area, Tommy seemed to have been alerted by something. He heard something in the distance and he put a hand out to stop Trenton and pushed him back. Tommy then took his own rifle off of his shoulder and he looked right in the direction of where this opening was. And it was right at that moment that Tommy was shot. Now, Tommy had recently come to his wife and told her he was being followed, and they could back this up because he had recently installed a camera in his truck to watch someone tailing him. They had made shirts to wear to make sure that people remembered Crystal's face and remembered her story. And he never took it off unless he was going to church. They even ended up burying him in one of these shirts. He wasn't letting anyone forget. Casey couldn't recall if anyone had known that they were hunting that morning. But like many people in Bardstown, they had taken off work to go hunting since it was the first week of hunting season. It was well known around the area that the Ballard family often hunted on Tommy's property for nearly 2 decades. When police looked into the scene, they found a small opening in the trees where they found that the trees and brush had been freshly cut with what looked like a saw. Casey said he had never seen an opening in that area like this. It seemed as if it was meticulously planned. Investigators still didn't rule out the possibility of Tommy's death simply just being an unfortunate hunting accident. But the Ballard family, they knew better. They took matters into their own hands and they contacted Jim Kavanaugh. They went to where this opening was, which was not far for a rifle to shoot. On the other side of the opening area was the Bluegrass Highway. Someone could have easily have pulled off onto the side of the road, hidden by different trees and bushes, and sat waiting for the perfect shot. Jim even said that he wouldn't be surprised if it had been done by two people, one shooting and the other driving the getaway car, all to make them get out of the area faster. While Jim was getting a closer look at the area where Tommy's killer had possibly been, he found an obvious area of kickback on a tree from where someone had leaned against this tree to shoot. And then the force of the shot caused damage to the part of the tree from where they had been leaning on it. The tree had a direct and perfect line to exactly where Tommy was killed when he. They even created a reenactment of the possible scene at the same time of day. Tommy's family told private investigators that over the past year, Tommy had been keeping a box full of anything pertaining to Crystal's case. Every tip that they had received had been written down, including every address, every map of locations that she could have been, and even every security camera in the area that Crystal had been seen on. Sherry said that if he wasn't out physically looking for Crystal, he would be on the home computer working on his own investigation. Sherry allowed investigators to take pictures and make copies of everything. She hoped that they would actually comb through what Tommy had already found. Investigators laid out everything before them, organized Tommy's notes into subcategories. In Tommy's box was surveillance footage on July 3rd of Crystal at Walmart with her kids at 4:36 p.m. This footage very likely just hours before her disappearance, and possibly the final hours of her life. In May 2016, a white Buick became part of evidence when a private investigator found that it was the one that was parked at the Houck farm the night Crystal disappeared. The Houck brothers' grandmother, Anna Whitesides, owned a white Buick, but sold it several weeks after Crystal went missing. Authorities issued a subpoena for the 82-year-old grandmother to testify before the grand jury. The subpoena stated that the car may have been used to dispose a body, cleaned, and sold in an attempt to prevent evidence from being discovered. The grandmother invoked her Fifth Amendment right not to talk and refused to testify before the grand jury. Attorney Jason Floyd said her statement to police and the car buyer's information was enough. A judge later ruled to keep all future proceedings involving her confidential. In August 2016, police searched the residence of Nick Houck and that grandmother for DNA. Investigators were able to find that car and found out that it had been sold to a dealership. They tracked it down. There was a tracker under the front seat, so they immediately tested that GPS. They took it in and got to work right away. Fortunately, they found out that that GPS hadn't been in working condition well before Crystal had gone missing. They also found what seemed to be bodily fluids and tested them for blood, but it turned out not to be blood. In May of 2017, police announced that they had assigned 2 troopers to look into all the Bardstown murders and disappearances. Jason Scott Ellis was born on September 22nd, 1979. He grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, with his two sisters and their parents, Denny and Pam. From a young age, Jason showed talent in baseball, and he became a star player in high school, earning the title of Player of the Year in 1998. After graduating in 1998, Jason played baseball for the University of Cumberland in Williamsburg, Kentucky, where he set multiple records. After earning a bachelor's degree in communication in 2003, Jason went on to play with the Cincinnati Reds minor league baseball team. A year later, Jason married his college sweetheart, Amy, and they welcomed two sons. Jason eventually left the Cincinnati Reds and his family settled in Bardstown, Kentucky. Jason volunteered as a baseball coach, and in 2006, he fulfilled his lifelong dream of joining the police department. Within a year, he became Bardstown's only canine officer with his German Shepherd, Figo. Amy described Jason as a police officer who went by the book, but he was also very friendly and humorous. Even during traffic stops, he would approach his work with a light heart and he would try to make them laugh in the process. According to the police chief, Jason was one of the top officers when it came to arrest numbers. He averaged about a dozen drug related arrests each month. In 2008, just 2 years into his law enforcement career, Jason received the Officer of the Year award. He also earned the Governor's Award for impaired driving enforcement on 2 occasions. Throughout the years, Jason remained devoted to removing drugs from the streets and ensuring his community was safe. On the late afternoon of May 24th, 2013, Jason reported to work. Typically, he'd bring Figo, but the canine SUV was in the shop, so Figo stayed at home. Jason drove a marked cruiser shared by multiple officers. After completing a routine shift, Jason left work at about 2 a.m. and headed home, still wearing his police uniform. Just after 2:30 a.m., a driver took exit 34 off Bluegrass Parkway, a sharp exit located between rocky hills. The driver encountered a police car parked diagonally in the road with its flashing blue lights activated, but there were no officers in sight. Concerned, the driver got out and looked around. That's when he discovered 33-year-old Jason's body lying in front of his cruiser near a pile of trimmed tree limbs. Now, initially, the driver thought that the limb may have fallen on him or that he may have been struck by a car. All the driver knew at this point was that Jason was gone. So, using the car radio, the driver reported an officer down. The Bardstown police and Kentucky state troopers quickly arrived at the scene where they examined Jason's body. They determined that he had sustained gunshot wounds in his armpit and also in his head. Subsequent autopsy results concluded that he had been shot multiple times with a 12-gauge shotgun. Press, Jason's service weapon was still holstered, indicating that he did not anticipate this altercation. Unfortunately, there's no video footage of this because the cruiser that he was driving at the time was an older model and it didn't have a dash cam installed. Now, based on the evidence at the crime scene, authorities determined that after Jason took exit 34 on his usual route home, he encountered the limbs in the middle of the road. So he activated his lights, parked diagonally to block the road, and get out of the vehicle to clear the road hazard. While bending down to move the tree limbs, he was shot from above, which suggested that the gunman likely had been in a position nearby. It was clear to investigators that Jason was ambushed with no opportunity to reach for his weapon or the radio for help. One of the more suspicious things about this was that Jason was actually wearing his bulletproof vest, but whoever shot him either seemed to notice it or already knew that he would be wearing it, so they knew exactly where to shoot him. He was a loving father and husband, and his case remains unsolved. The incident marked the first time in Bardstown that an officer had been killed. Can you imagine the first time that anybody was killed? That's crazy. In response, the police chief instructed his 25 officers to respond to calls in pairs and to remain vigilant. Officers also took turns staying with Jason's family at night to ensure their safety. The Kentucky State Police took over the investigation with the assistance of the Bardstown Police and federal agencies like the FBI and ATF. On May 26th, the Kentucky State Police held a press conference where they announced that Jason's murder had been a premeditated ambush. However, they were still trying to figure out whether he was a specific target or if this was just something random. It didn't matter that it was an officer at all. It was just going to be whoever got out of the car and moved these tree limbs, or because he had been driving an office, like a random car, was he not the intended victim, but somebody else was? May 28th, the Bardstown Police Department held a press conference announcing a reward over $30,000. The police chief provided an update mentioning that the department was working tirelessly around the clock to find answers. They said that they had received numerous tips and a few leads, but nothing that they could really go anywhere with. At this point, they didn't seem to have a motive or any suspects. On May 30th, Jason's funeral took place on what would have been his 7th anniversary as a police officer. Approximately 800 police cruisers and other emergency vehicles from across the country participated in a 20-mile procession to the cemetery where Jason was laid to rest. During the funeral, Jason's canine partner Figo was present. He slowly approached the casket and gently pawed at it. Following the ceremony, Figo retired from police work and he was allowed to stay with the family. On June 4th, the Kentucky State Police announced the $125,000 award and revealed that the tree limbs discovered at that exit did not belong to any trees in that immediate area. Now, while Jason did have some high profile arrests, they weren't more notable than any other officers had done. Although the police interviewed Amy to ask if she knew anyone that Jason had been having problems with or if there was any red flags that she had known about. She said no, Jason never talked about his work, ever. And he said that it was to shield her. But Amy admitted that this did make her feel like she was shut off from this part of his life. Amy also mentioned that they never talked about what would happen if Jason actually did lose his life. They didn't have a will, and all they had was a very small life insurance policy. She said he never wanted to talk about death. So when he died, they didn't have a plan in place. In addition to going through Jason's arrest records and speaking to Amy, the state police also dug deeper into his background for anything that might provide a motive for this. They later said Jason, a devoted family man, an honest policeman, a young baseball coach, a pillar of the community. In mid-June, the Kentucky Standard reported that the police had been receiving death threats through letters, phone calls, and social media, implying that there was more to come. The police turned them over to the FBI. It didn't seem like there was any significant developments that resulted in these so-called threats. By mid-June, more than a month had passed since Jason had been gunned down. The Bardstown police chief expressed frustration that they hadn't made significant progress in finding answers. In late August, the FBI announced efforts to generate new leads. It included a billboard campaign and a total of 218,000 reward money. Despite these efforts, no one came forward with any information. The police chief said that he found it troublesome. The reward was so high, yet no one came forward with information. This lack of cooperation indicated to him that the murders run deep. I actually think it's the opposite. While, yes, I can see where they're going with that, I really think that only maybe like one or two people know about it and they are keeping their mouth shut. Now, I think it was about November that year, the state police had actually released a YouTube video asking for the public support in trying to get some tips going for this case. Now, the police did receive some tips on this video. They did not get any leads to actually go anywhere. And because of that, the case actually stalled out. In May of 2017, just 2 days before the 4th anniversary of Jason's murder, his canine partner Figo passed away at the age of 11 after a prolonged illness. A graveside service was held for Figo, and his remains were placed in an urn next to Jason's headstone. In October of 2022, Jason's memorial, which is located off of exit 34, was vandalized. This left his family with a lot of questions. They wondered, why would somebody vandalize his memorial now, 9.5 years after his murder? Amy conveyed a powerful message to the vandal when speaking. She said, "You cannot take away the man that he was. You cannot take away our memories, and you cannot take away that we will continue to honor and remember him and the man that he was." Even though he was shot and killed 2 years before Crystal's disappearance, they believed in finding answers to what happened to Crystal will give them answers to what happened in other mysterious deaths in the town. 1 year later, in 2014, Kathy Netherland and her 16-year-old daughter Samantha became the newest headline topic. Kathy was a special education teacher loved by the community, and so was Samantha. The two of them had both been tied up, tortured, and brutally murdered, suffering both bullet wounds and stab wounds. Their case still remains unsolved to this day. Just 1 year later, Crystal went missing, and the year after that, Tommy had been murdered on his own property. Crystal's aunt actually went missing from the area in 1979. According to the Kentucky Standard, Sherry Ballard went missing from Bardstown. The 19-year-old was over 7 months pregnant at the time of her disappearance, and her remains weren't found until August of 1983. They were discovered on a farm close to where Crystal's car was found. Her estranged husband, Edsel, who went by Eddie Barnes, and another man, George, were eventually convicted and sentenced to prison for her murder. Crystal's family and supporters started putting up signs all around the town. Now, the town discouraged this, citing that it was affecting tourism, and people would think that this town was just full of murders. At one point, the signs started going missing. They were being taken from people's yards, and people had actually paid for their signs. People were finding them destroyed in fields or dumpsters. Someone's taking them down and destroying them. In July 2017, a woman named Crystal Maupin was seen on security camera footage at Circle K in Bardstown. She was seen getting out of her car, taking down signs regarding Crystal's disappearance. This woman was now romantically involved with Brooks Houck. She admitted to doing this, and she was arrested. In the summer of 2018, Brooks Houck was arrested for stealing over 200 bundles of shingles from Lowe's during 4 separate visits over 11 days. He pleaded not guilty to several felony theft charges. Now, he did take it to trial, and he was acquitted. It is possible that it was just a misunderstanding. That was 4 separate trips. Months had gone by, Crystal's still missing, and the whole community came together volunteering for search party after search party in all of the surrounding areas, such as Bluegrass Parkway, the woods, even the waters nearby. Every search came up empty handed, and Brooks was still the only suspect. He was the only person who also did not help in all of these searches. Even though Crystal's car was evidence, detectives quickly gave it back to her parents, who were stunned by this. Media attention and retired homicide detective named Dwayne were seeing the updates daily, and they were in absolute shock. He reached out to the family and he offered his expertise and knowledge. Upon arriving to the home, he looked at the car. From his professional experience, he immediately knew that the car did not look like it had been fingerprinted or checked thoroughly for DNA. Dwayne said that when you dust for fingerprint DNA, there's like a leftover residue. It's very visible. I think it's like black or like a dark blue color. I think it's black though. He also noted that the carpet in the trunk and other items in the vehicle that could have had DNA evidence on them should have been removed. The forensic team took extensive photos of everything in the vehicle and they got to work. But the time that they finished, there was an entire pile of evidence bags with possible DNA and fingerprint hits after performing luminol tests. They found an area in the back right corner on the part where the cadaver dog had indicated, and so that could possibly be human blood. Ultimately, after testing, the stain it didn't turn out to be blood. Kentucky State Trooper actually explained that the investigative resources are extremely limited in Kentucky. According to them, the crime lab will typically only accept 10 pieces of evidence for testing in murder cases. One of the worst crimes and only 10 pieces of evidence. The team wondered if this might have been the case during the investigation. Police have declined to comment on what evidence has been discovered or processed because it's part of the investigation. Before redoing a forensic search of the Impala, a cadaver dog, Gina, and her handler, Judy, who've been working with the family, checked Roger's car for possible presence of human remains. After sniffing around the Impala, Gina sat on the ground before the open trunk and began barking. The handler said, "She's trying to convince me that there's something there with her barking." Now she walked over to Gina and she said, "Okay, show me where." And Gina immediately jumped into the trunk. Her handler said she's never jumped into a trunk before. Gina once again started barking once now she's inside the trunk. Said that she's giving me indication that there's a human remains in that trunk. An anonymous inmate told the Ballard family's private investigator that he had heard that Crystal's remains were burned in some kind of arson fire. He claimed that he was a higher up in an unspecified crime organization where many people would confide in him regarding their crimes. This also included the murder of Jason Ellis, as well as Kathy and Samantha Netherland. Investigators looked into these claims about Crystal's remains and found that there had been garages in the area that had been burnt down. He claimed that he tried to tell the police of these things, but they said that they were just trying to turn things around on him and they were just trying to get him to confess. So he cut off all communications with the authorities. 5 years after her disappearance in July 2020, human remains were found near the border of Nelson and Washington County, close to where Crystal had gone missing. Her families got their hopes up, believing that they might finally have closure. However, it wasn't Crystal. There were many searches throughout the years, The Houck family farm, which covered, I think it was like 360 acres, was searched with at least 14 cadaver dogs in August 2016, including the home of the grandmother, Anna Whitesides. FBI agents went to a storage unit to load Crystal's Impala onto a tow truck and drive it off. Search warrants were served, including Brooks' house and Nick's house, and the mother's house, as well as a storage unit in the area. The FBI told the media they recovered several items of interest in the search. In 2021, the FBI ripped up the driveway of Brooks' home, which had been built the same year that Crystal had gone missing. On August 24th, 2021, the FBI actively searches 3 locations in the Woodland Springs subdivision. In 2022, they searched the family farm where Crystal had allegedly been seen. They focused on a smaller portion of the farm and brought in cadaver dogs, drones, and excavating equipment. The search lasted 5 days, and the FBI did not want to give any details on what they found. On June 21st, 2023, Joseph Lawson was indicted. And on August 15th, 2023, he was arrested regarding Crystal's disappearance. Joseph Lawson is being accused of destroying, mutilating, concealing, and removing physical evidence related to this case, as well as aiding in the planning of the crime that intentionally caused the death of another person. Now, he has had some charges in the past. It was burglary, trespassing, assault, and possession of M. No one knew who Joseph was. The only thing anyone could tell was that his last name was Lawson, and that the person who called Brooks in the middle of the night, his name was Steve Lawson. A few days later, Brooks was officially announced as a suspect in Crystal's disappearance. Not only was he announced as a suspect, but they also formally said that they believed that she was no longer alive. On September 20th, Brooks was officially indicted for murder and tampering with evidence. On September 27th, 2023, Brooks was arrested. He was given a $10 million bond. Brooks argued that Joseph's bond was so much lower that his should be reduced. The court said it was because Lawson had no other possessions besides his truck, and that $500,000 is like $10 million to Joseph. They wanted to set the bonds high enough so that neither one of them could get out at this arraignment. Crystal's 4 other children have been with Sherry since Crystal's disappearance. Sherry's tried for years to get custody, or at least even visitation rights of Eli. When Brooks was arrested, Brooks's mother and Sherry both went to court to fight over Eli. The proceedings were ruled to be confidential, and neither side was allowed to comment or to share to the media how the judge ruled. However, coming out of the courtroom, Sherry was all smiles, and Brooks' mother looked less than happy. So, based on their reactions, it seemed that Sherry was granted custody and she can finally begin to repair that relationship with her youngest grandchild and allow him to finally see his other siblings who had not been allowed to see him since he was only a few years old. At the October 2023 bond hearing, the prosecutor told the judge that his team was also investigating Ballard's death and believed that they had the gun used to kill him. The firearm that we purchased from Nicholas Houck, who was using a fake name when he sold the rifle, was the same caliber of rifle that matched the one that killed Tommy. There are 5 criteria that we look at, and so far, 4 out of 5 of the criteria has matched. They said that while the court will not speculate about a motive for killing Tommy, it is highly alarming why Nick would have been selling the same caliber firearm. A woman named Rebecca Greer, who was registered as living at the same address as Steve Lawson, was also indicted on an account of first-degree murder on May 24th, which is the same day that Steve was indicted on the account of tampering with physical evidence months before the conspiracy to commit murder charges took place. Ultimately, this was dismissed in October. The case was unsealed, but the details are very limited. Rebecca allegedly made a false material statement and her bond was set for $50,000 in cash. Steve's immunity deal claims that they found out he was lying during negotiations, which voided the immunity deal. When they confronted him about it, he offered some shocking new allegations about Brooks. The documents say Lawson is very aware that he lied. He admitted this in a recorded call he made from the jail. And when confronted, Lawson finally admitted that Brooks Houck recruited him to move Crystal Rogers' car. Lawson further admitted that Brooks was trying to find someone to eliminate Crystal Rogers. In the days before Crystal disappeared, Brooks asked his employee, Steve Lawson, to kill her or at least find someone else who would carry out the deed. Steve Lawson filed a motion to have his charges dropped, saying he cooperated with investigators and in exchange he was supposed to be given immunity. A judge dismissed that motion, saying he lied too many times during interviews with police. Now, now Steve's attorney, Mr. Lavitt, he was trying not to move. He just wanted out. He wanted out of the case. It seemed like they were bumping heads a lot. He wanted out. And the judge said, "Nope, sorry, you're not going to do it." And then they go back to court and say, "You know what, Your Honor, there's nothing that we can do right now." So finally, the judge agrees that Steve can have a new lawyer. The new lawyer files for a continuance because they had just gotten the case. There was an enormous amount of discovery. So Steve's trial was supposed to start in February of 2025. It actually got postponed until May 2025. One of Crystal's daughters wrote, "My mom is a very special woman. The memory that will forever be in my heart is going to DQ and buying my mama lunch. We would always get the chicken strip basket with toast and gravy to go with it. Going over to Mama Martin's and playing Phase 10 and Aggravation over and over while eating snacks. Since my mom's been missing, life has been really hard. I always wonder what my life would be like if she and my papa were still here." Kylie was only 14 when Crystal disappeared. Waking up every day and not being able to wake up and be like, "Hey, mom, what are you doing today?" Just like normal little things. The little things really matter more than the big, huge things. People say it gets easier. It never gets easier. Like graduation. When I graduated high school, seeing all the kids with their moms and they were like so proud. I knew my mom was proud, but like just wanting her to be there physically was very hard to see the other moms. Now, there comes some new evidence. There's 2 strands of hair that was found inside Crystal's vehicle in 2016. The evidence was made public after prosecutors filed a motion to have the hairs tested for DNA profile. However, the prosecutors later withdrew that motion after determining the hairs did not belong to any of the suspects. A judge has already ruled Steve will have a separate trial from his son and Brooks. Steve's trial started on May 27th. It had been moved to Bowling Green. There was no cameras allowed. He was going for the conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. Now, going into this, his attorneys asked for another continuance since they hadn't been on the case for very long and there was a voluminous amount of evidence. The judge said, no, they just went on about the day. A total of 15 jurors was paneled. That's 12 with 3 alternates. The panel consisted of 10 women and 5 men, and it was just picked within a few hours. And Steve's phone records indicated that he pinged in all of the locations that he would have had to ping in for him to be the one that moved the vehicle. Now, his defense had actually conceded to the fact that he did help move her car, but he was not involved in the conspiracy to commit murder. Steve Lawson drove the car to mile marker 114 on Bluegrass Parkway. His son Joseph was asked to pick him up there. Sherry Ballard testified first. She testified, and they saw video of Sherry running into him at the gas station. She went up to the passenger side of his car and they had a brief discussion. And that's where she told him that she was going to report her missing. And he said, "Well, yeah, you should do that." Now, prosecutors brought in Lauren Hardin, which I guess was a stepdaughter of Steve's. She said that she wasn't looking for an apartment like he claimed in the interview clip, that he was looking for an apartment for his stepdaughter. And then Brooke said, "Okay, well, I have to call Crystal and ask her. And so I'll talk to you tomorrow." Well, the stepdaughter said, "I wasn't even looking for a place." And in fact, she already had rented from Brooks and Crystal before. So if she was actually looking for a place at midnight, if she was actually looking for a place, she already knew how to get a hold of them. But she said she wasn't looking for them at all. Now, the defense brought up the fact that she had prior drug use. They asked, "Could this affect your memory?" And she said, "Yeah, it could." Elizabeth Chesser, I'm not sure if she is Joseph's daughter or Joseph's ex. So you have Steve and then his son Joseph. So I don't know if it's the daughter or the ex-girlfriend. I'm kind of confused with that. But she testified as well. She said that she overheard Steve saying that he was planning on leaving his ex-wife, Tammy. So Steve and Tammy were together, and it was overheard that he was going to leave his ex-wife, Tammy, because Tammy knew that he had committed murder, and she was going to tell on him. Now, the defense asked, "Why didn't you go to the police? If you guys thought that he had murdered somebody, why didn't anybody tell the police?" And she said, "Clearly, I knew I would be next." Now, Nick Houck and Rosemary Houck have been listed as potential co-conspirators. They have not been charged. There's no charges out there. There's no indictments out there. There's none of that. It's considered an open investigation. Now, Stacy Cranmore, she was a contract worker right around 2015. She was doing different types of jobs on construction sites for Brooks houses, and she said that there was some unusual activity going on around there. One day, she said that she had noticed Brooks was driving around with Steve Lawson in the passenger side seat. That was very alarming because he never invited his workers in his truck. And they were just driving around the neighborhood, just chatting it up. She said it was weird. And eventually, when they did park and Steve got out of the car, he comes up to her. She says, "What was that about? That was so weird." And he tells her, "I have to go take care of this girl." She's like, "Take care of what? How?" And he said, "I just have to take care of her." So she asked, "Well, are you putting her into rehab or what?" And he said, "No, I wish that was the case. This girl has 5 kids." At the time she hears this, she doesn't think much of it. She doesn't know what girl he's talking about. But just a couple of days later, she starts noticing the missing posters with Crystal's face all over them. She's automatically remembering this conversation, and so she calls up the police and she leaves her phone number to report this information, but nobody calls her back. Now, they were getting thousands of tips. Investigators say that they were nowhere prepared for the amount of tips that were coming in. But in October, just a few short months later, the sheriff at the time says that they believe that Crystal is dead. They also say that they believe that Brooks is the main suspect. And it's at that point that Stacy's like, "Okay, wait a minute. I actually have to go down there. Like, the police have to know about this. So she goes down to the sheriff's office in person and she writes it all down. She makes it all official and puts it on the record. Now, the defense asked, why did they need to know about this situation? Why was it so important to you? She said, well, I hope someone would do it for me. I'm a mom of four. I would hope that someone would stand up for me. If police had listened to me back then, we would have been here earlier. Now, another contractor, Charlie Girdley, he worked with Brooks back in 2015. Charlie says he saw Brooks give Joseph the car keys. And it was actually Charlie who picked Steve up from a house. He said he saw Crystal's car there in the driveway, and that was before it was later abandoned. He also didn't tell police about this because he was worried about getting into trouble for something that he didn't do. He said multiple times that Brooks said he wanted to get rid of Crystal. There was actual discussions at the work sites about who might be the best person for the job. Now, during Steve's trial, there was 3 different audios that was played. And I'm not sure which audio this was with, but Steve is recorded saying that Brooks said that he wanted his wife gone. And Steve says, to me, it means that he wanted her deceased. Steve says that he responded to Brooks saying that, and he said, look, you got the wrong guy. And then Brooks said, well, can you point me in the right direction? And Steve answers back, talk to Charlie. Now, 7, 8-ish years after Crystal originally goes missing, that's when they actually pull the phone reports. They look at Steve's, Brooks, and Joseph's cell phones. They already knew, and the defense conceded to the moving her car. I think it was like tampering with evidence or something. So they already conceded to that. So he said, I'm the guy, I did that. But I had nothing to do with the conspiracy. Well, it wasn't the pings of his cell phone that was the problem for investigators. The biggest issue was the multiple deleted phone calls that the investigators are going to ask about, and they're going to question those. So there was a deleted phone call from Steve's phone to Brooks, and it lasted over 2 minutes on July 8th. There was also a phone call played that was with Steve in jail already with his mom. And so those phone calls are recorded. It was hard. My stomach sinks for everybody, right? Crystal's family is there trying to get answers. And of course, this guy could have came forward before. But I also feel for his mom. His mom she didn't ask for this, right? So they play the recording, and Crystal's family was in tears. So Steve's mom asks Steve, why did you do this? You have to know what happened to this little girl. Did Brooks ask you to kill her? Why would you do that? And he explains, no. It was just this. I didn't kill her. I didn't want to be a part of it. I just helped with something differently. His mom says, 2 days later, you knew that that girl was missing. You should have gone to the police. And he says, Mom, you're right. And she says, well, Steve, only you know what happened. Now, this phone call happened just a few weeks after he was first arrested. He sounded so defeated and beat down in the call. Now, remember Nick, the brother, he was fired for helping Brooks. Now, the police chief comes out. He's been a police chief for 35 years. He said about Nick Houck, firing his ass was one of the best things that I've done. Like, that's so amazing. So, Steve Lawson was aware that Halk wanted to kill Crystal and that he actually asked him to do it. When Brooks inquired about killing Crystal, Steve said, "I'm not going to do that." But then he did take it a step further and said, "Hey, go have a conversation with Charlie." So during trial, um, I believe that this was before the jury went back with a verdict. Steve's mom testified and she said, "Look, do what's right, but you're going to have to live with this. I have incredible sympathy for Sherry. I feel so bad for her, and it was hard to imagine who could do something like this. Who would be the kind of person that would hurt Crystal Rogers?" She said she would do the same thing if she was in Sherry's position. She said, "I look at my son and I question him because I didn't raise him to do anything like this." Steve Lawson took the stand, and he was the last person to testify in this trial. Now, I don't know because it's not recorded what defense he kind of went with. Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to plead to the jury? I can see that he could be like, "Hey, I was following my boss, Brooks. He was my only source of income. I didn't want to kill her. I didn't want to participate in this. All I did was move a car. That's it. Like, I was just listening to my boss and I only moved a car, but I had nothing to do with anything else. I didn't want to be next or I didn't want to get in trouble." I don't know what he said. But either way, it really, I don't think, mattered a whole lot. Because at the end of the day, he admitted. Brooks went to him and said, "I want her gone." And he said, "I'm not going to do that, but you can go talk to Charlie." And instead, he should have gone to the police and said, "Hey, this hit is about to happen. Y'all need to take care of that." The judge tells the jury, "Hey, if you guys can't get him on this conspiracy for murder, you guys can actually do a rehabilitation." And so it would drop, I think it was like a 20-year sentence or 25-year sentence that he was going up for, and it will actually drop it down to a 5-year penalty. So the jury goes back into deliberations. And I think that this was on Friday. So the day after Memorial Day, Tuesday, they started. And by Friday, the jury gets it. And after just 2 hours and 23 minutes, the jury comes back guilty on both accounts. And they are recommending that he serves 17 years concurrently, which means that they go together for the two charges. So if he gets 5 years on one charge and 17 years on the other, he will run them together. Now, they can have a recommendation, but it's the judge that has the final call, and that's going to come down on August 6th because they actually have another trial to line up for Brooks and Joseph. So they have that coming up. And so the judge is actually going to set the sentencing August 6th. Crystal's 21-year-old daughter, Tori, is getting married soon. She says, "My mom will not be able to see me get married or see my kids someday. We've had to go through all of our milestones without our mother. I still think we'll find her. Not in the way we want to, but we will." Joseph and Brooks' trial is scheduled for June 24th, I believe. No cameras in the courtroom, but I'm very interested in how that's going to play out. All right, you guys, this was so difficult for me. It was 3 takes. Whew. Audio, video, all kinds of mess today. I want to know, where do you think Crystal is? What do you think happened to her? Who do you think was all involved? Like, I think for obvious reasons, we believe that Brooks is involved, right? Do you think Nick was involved? Or what about the mom? Like, where is Rosemary coming in as a co-conspirator that's not been indicted yet? Like, what part did she play? And what do you guys think was like the reason for all of this? I mean, they weren't married, so it wasn't like that there's a prenup and a divorce and life insurance and all of that. What was the reason for all of this? Let me know your guys' thoughts below because I'm just all over the place. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means so much to me. I have some hopes and some dreams and some goals, and I'm hoping to get there sooner rather than later. And yeah, this is a fun ride. So, um, I appreciate you guys so much. Before I leave you, today's riddle. I come from a mine and always surrounded by wood. Everyone uses me. What am I? A pencil lead. We must avoid looking the other way and saying it isn't my business. We need to step up together because it is our business.